I'm excited for this next talk by Steph Rand, River Runs Through IT, where just the analogy and all the tie-ins, because I know you've secretly already been posting and sharing about this, so clearly you're passionate about it. But I'm excited to go this. So without further ado, Steph, I'll hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Justin. How are you doing today? I'm
I
very
am doing
excited to
great.
be here. All right, so let's get into it. Welcome to A River Runs Through IT, what Whitewater Rafting taught me about incident response. My name is Steph Rand, and I'm very excited to be here with y'all today. All right, let's get started. Go. So my goals for the talk. For everybody, I hope that you get some new ideas and have a new lens. And I'm going to tell some what I think are pretty excellent stories. For internal teams, I'm hoping that you'll have some new ideas for training, as well as tips for kind of overall better incident response outcomes. For managers, I would love to give you some new metaphors to use to communicate these technical concepts with some of your less technical stakeholders. Also, I'm going to give you some tips to help your team be better prepared for an incident response. For fellow consultants, it's always a good reminder that what we do every day is a normal day for us, but is the worst day for someone else. So just something good to keep in mind, and hopefully this will give you a look at that. So like I said, my name is Steph. I work for DFIR I Mandiant as an incident response consultant. I've been at Mandiant for about 1.5 years, and I've worked over under about 40 cases, but my over under for IR investigations that I've had a really good window into, been really in the weeds on, is 20-ish or so, a little bit more than that, but about 20. I have a background in clinical psychology. And between clinical psychology and raft guiding and incident response, I was a raft guide and a trip leader in North Carolina for a couple of seasons. So I logged about 1,000 river miles as a guide on 3 separate rivers. And I'd like to start off today with a breath of fresh air, pun absolutely intended. I'd love to tell you about one of those mornings on the water. All right, so I want you to imagine this. It was almost exactly 5 years ago. It was a beautiful September morning. The water's flowing, the sky's blue. The fall is the best time to be on the Ocoee, which is a river that's in southeastern Tennessee. So I've gone out there to go on the Ocoee for the first time with my good buddy James, and we're gonna R2 the upper section of the Ocoee River. R2ing is when it's just you and a friend in the boat together. The upper is a moderately difficult section. You've got class 2 to class 4 rapids, so novice kind of up to intermediate level. And one of the rapids, here we go, let's get some perspective on this first. All right, here we go. All right, so I think this is important. So one of the class 4 rapids is called Godzilla, and it's at the Ocoee Whitewater Center, and it's a big class 4 wave. And right after that is another big wave called Humongous. And one of the things that as a raft guide you start to do is you learn about the environment that you're in. It's very important for risk management. So I know from talking to James and from my own research that what I need to do, if the worst case were to happen, if I were to have an out-of-boat experience, is I need to swim toward river right. There's a lot of people that are going to be over there, including James's trip leader. And I need to stay away from river left. River left is a bad time. It's going to be a long swim, and one of the more dangerous rapids on the Ocoee, Roach Motel, is a little bit downstream, so I want to avoid that. So here's what y'all already got a little preview of. These are stills from the video that James made of the shenanigans that happened that morning, and he affectionately titled the video "Godzilla Eats." So here we are, headed towards Godzilla and Humongous. You can see it right in front of us. And there just happened to be a lot of people standing on the bank, maybe waiting for something to happen. So we hit Godzilla, water splashing everywhere, and we immediately get pushed sideways. We don't have enough momentum to get through this wave. So the water's sort of pouring over and kind of kicking the boat. So it kicks the boat hard once, and I get knocked down into the floor of the boat. It kicks the boat again, I fall out. It kicks the boat again, James falls out. And I remember very clearly being underwater. This was my first unintentional out of boat experience. And I thought I would be more panicked, but I wasn't, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. I had training, I had a plan, I had preparation for this worst case scenario. So I remember thinking, just stay calm. Your PFD, your life vest, is going to float you up. And it did. And here I'm thinking, okay, you got to get your nose and your toes up, because that's the safest way to swim in whitewater. And I know that humongous is next. I know I don't have time to start swimming. So I get ready to go through humongous, which is what's starting to happen here. You can see Godzilla in the upper corner still has our boat, which is very exciting. You don't see me for a couple of minutes. It's because James was underwater for longer than I was. But what does happen when you get another look at me is I'm on the end of a rope thrown by his trip leader. So I started swimming over to River Right. His trip leader threw the rope, and you learn in guide school to flip on your back, hold the rope over your shoulder, and you kind of pendulum in with the current. You can see that my left foot looks a little different than my right foot. The Ocoee took my shoe and my sock, which I was not expecting. And climbed up out of the water, huge adrenaline rush, but I was fine. The outcome was fine because I was prepared for what was going to happen. I knew the sequence of events that was going to unfold. I knew the best practices. One thing that I wasn't expecting was how challenging it was to get back in the boat and to keep paddling. This is about halfway through the run. And like I mentioned, there's some more rapids just downstream. So I had to kind of pull myself together, get back in the boat with my one shoe that was left. And we had a great rest of the morning. It was a good day. I learned a lot. I learned a lot that morning. I learned that it's always best to prepare for the worst, because if you are prepared, then you don't have to think as hard in the moment about what to do. There's less panic. It's important to trust your team. I trust James absolutely. And I didn't know his trip leader very well, but I trusted his trip leader because we were there for the same goal, for a good outcome in this scenario. It will happen to you. This was the very end of my first season of guiding, and I had never had an accidental out of boat experience. So, just kind of accepting that as inevitable was something that was reinforced. And you have to be ready to keep going. You have to be ready to hop back in the boat and keep paddling downstream. But like I said, it was a great day. Here's a picture from later on that day. We went back to the rafting center, put on my spare pair of shoes. I got to ride along on the middle Ocoee as a customer in James's boat, which was absolutely wonderful. Now, y'all are smart. I'm sure you can see some of the comparisons that you can start drawing between the raft guiding and security analysis. Raft guides and analysts aren't in the business of emergency response, but these emergencies are part of the business. There's something that comes up. Outside forces can really come in and mess up your day. One of the things that makes being a security analyst more stressful is the river is not out to get you personally. Threat actors sometimes are, which is one of the things, like I said, that makes analysis much more stressful. And there's a lot more overlap that we'll explore in this talk. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I started working at Mandiant and seeing some of these points of commonality is I saw some opportunities for lessons that we could bring in from the whitewater rafting industry and maybe use in information security to help us have better outcomes when we had these unexpected incidents. So the base that I'm operating from for this talk, because there's a lot of different ways that it could go, but here's what I really want to explore today, which is what I'm calling the fundamental premise. When you start whitewater boating, you hear this a lot, that we're all between swims. Everybody's very matter of fact about it. Everybody from brand new guides all the way up to the founder of the rafting operation knows that things are going to happen on the water. It's inevitable. And there aren't really any negative consequences unless you're wildly negligent or it's a pattern of risky behavior. You're not going to get fired for flipping a boat or two or three. It's just, it happens to everybody, even the very best guides. And part of the reason why everybody is kind of has this perspective is that, we're trained how to respond as a raft guide. It's baked into your, and I feel like that does a lot of really positive things for how guides are able to respond in those moments. So if I could have you leave here today with one philosophical concept to take out into the world with you, it would be this: that we are all between incidents. Because we are all between incidents. In today's threat landscape, it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, but when. And what I would love to see is, I would love to see this mindset, like it is in raft guiding, be brought into the entire org. So from the top down, it's going to happen. Let's expect it. Let's be matter of fact about this. I see so often that blame starts to get shifted occasionally. And, I read stories from other folks' experiences. And I think that's a real shame, because it shouldn't come down to just one person or one team. That puts a lot of pressure on the folks that are actually responding in that moment and does not make response any easier. Instead, let's train everybody how to respond at every level. Let's make it part of a common conversation. Let's focus on preparedness and best practices, because you can't just prevent these things from happening. It really is all about preparation, and preparation is what's going to make the biggest difference in kind of the overall incident response outcome. So how do you prepare? What are some things you need to do? I'm going to start with training, because that's one of the places that you start in the guiding industry. So most guiding companies, almost all of them, hire guides with no experience at the start of the season. And because there's a lot of burnout for different reasons, or there's not a lot of burnout, there's a lot of retention issues in guiding as well. In our industry, it is burnout. Burnout is the problem, or one of the problems. But it's just kind of expected that guiding companies will hire guides with very little experience. Because of that, you have a mix of brand new guides, junior guides, and senior guides, and the roles are very clearly defined based on risk management. There are things that senior guides do that junior guides absolutely should not do until they have shown they can do these things. Training has to be part of the conversation because of this, because you have people with no experience and people at all levels. And there's a lot of different ways to get training. It's just part of the everyday conversation. And of course, it differs based on the river that you're on, as well as the tasks that you're expected to do. This idea that you have increasing levels of responsibility based on your demonstrated ability, and these three concepts here are pretty universal across the rafting industry. So everybody starts with ride-alongs. Ride-alongs are riding along with a senior guide, and you might be acting as a guest. Hopefully the guide is sharing some tips, and you're learning how to navigate the rapids safely. You're watching them, you're hearing them tell stories. The next step is guide-alongs. Guide-alongs are, you're guiding the boat, or the junior guide is guiding the boat, but the senior guide is in the boat. They're there to watch them, to give them tips, to help them stay on the right track, to take over if something serious happens, maybe to guide some of the more intense rapids until the junior guide is ready. And then, depending upon how each river does it, sometimes it's a certain number of years you have to work before you can try to check out. Sometimes it's a certain number of guide-alongs you have to do, and they're kind of watching your level of improvement. Eventually, you do your checkout run. Checking out is when you're guiding the boat and the senior guide is in the raft, and they don't have to say a word. Their paddle does not have to touch the water. At that point, you have kind of graduated. You're ready to take on full responsibilities as being the only guide in a boat with customers. Here's a picture of my checkout run on the Nantahala River, which is a very low risk river. My senior guide, Jesse, was not expecting me to check out, and he was very excited because this was actually my first guide along. But I'd had guide school on the river, so I'd run it many times. And since the level of risk on this river is lower, it wasn't inappropriate for him to go ahead and check me out. I had demonstrated that I had the skills necessary to start guiding the boats on my own. Someplace that's a little bit higher risk, like the Chattooga. After the end of 2 seasons of guiding, one of my managers told me I was probably ready to start training on the Chattooga. I think that you have to work on the Chattooga for at least a year before they'll start letting you try to check out. Someplace else that's higher risk, for example, the Grand Canyon, you might work out east for a few years, work out west for a few years, because the rapids and the gear out there is different. And then once you get hired on by an outfitter on the canyon, you might be doing chores and you might not have any oar time for quite a while after you get hired. And that's appropriate for the environment that they have. I would love to see this kind of very structured, tiered training embraced sort of across the industry. I think it would make it a lot easier for guides for analysts to understand their progression, just like it is for guides to understand their progression. This is actually how my company trains junior analysts, and I think it works very well. So you start off with watching over shoulders and shadowing. They were just talking about this on the panel. You know, you have those senior analysts and engineers there that the junior analysts can learn from, can learn what actually is great practice in that work. After that, junior colleagues start performing tasks with a lot of QA and a lot of feedback on their performance. That gives them an environment where it's safe to learn and they can make mistakes. The risk level is not as extreme. They're able to, like I said, learn from their experience and gain more experience. And then finally, you know, if junior colleagues can perform these tasks with very little input from their senior colleagues, they're ready. They're ready to start maybe running their own incident teams. They're ready to be unleashed as an analyst in your environment who, you know, can handle the level of responsibility required. Some more ideas that I'd love to see brought from the river to the Security Operations Center. I strongly believe that just like great raft guides, great analysts are made, they're not found. You might find a perfect fit, but that's a little unusual. We have a skills gap. We have a staffing issue in the industry. It would be wonderful if bringing in new analysts was something that was more supported across the board by more orgs in general, because I think it really, once you invest in these people, enables you to take analysts to the next level. It's unfortunate that experience is the best teacher in the SOC, just like it is on the river, but it really is. You do need people to have that time in the water, so to speak, getting to know things, although reading and study help a great deal. You need to practice. On the river, you're encouraged to grab a boat, hop in, go have fun, go play with your friends. You make stupid choices, learn from them. It would be great if there's more opportunities to do that in information security as well. You know, we don't get the chance to kind of develop muscle memory, so I encourage people to take really good notes. That helps you sort of build up that mental muscle memory. And this idea, this culture of learning, of training, of asking questions, not only does it help your analysts at every level do their very best, this is also a great way to combat burnout, which is something that I heard come up in the panel and I know has come up before. One of the biggest contributors to burnout is folks feeling like they're stuck, that there's no clear path forward, there's no way to progress. And so if you have this culture of learning and training and asking questions across all levels, that does wonderful things for helping people stay more engaged. And the last piece is preparing for emergencies as part of the day-to-day job. And I'm going to talk more about that in a lot more detail here in just a moment. So what are our key takeaways from training? I'm going to say it again. We're all between incidents. Consider hiring analysts with less experience or encouraging the folks who are in charge of your hiring to consider this as an option. Because if you can do that, if you can help everyone get to the next level, if you have that training and teaching and mentoring, it will do really wonderful things for your SOC and for the culture of your SOC. I think that this kind of environment is one of the things that takes SOCs from good to fully mature. You know, having a culture of learning at all levels really helps everybody stay very deeply invested in what they're doing. All right, let's talk about preparation. Because preparation is a big piece of this. Prevention is good. Don't get me wrong. It is better not to flip the boat. It is. You'll hear this a lot if you start boating. You'll say you're nervous about going through a rapid and people will start saying, stay in the boat, just stay in the boat. You don't have to worry about it. And that's great. It's great if you can just stay in the boat, but you can't just stay in the boat every time. You've got to prepare for that worst case. What are you going to do when, not if, you swim? And what are the risks in not knowing how to respond in those moments? These are some questions that it's really important to ask ourselves. So we're going to talk about a lot of the commonalities again between the sock and the river. You're operating in an environment that has a lot of different factors involved. And one of the things that preparation does for you, that you need to do as part of preparation, is learning the environment and its hazards before you have to know them. So, on the river, it's going to be, what rocks do you need to keep people really far away from if they're in the water? In your org, this might be, what appliances do you have operating on your network? What are their patch levels? What are some areas of higher risk and a higher sensitivity? It's important to be ready for conditions to change. One person in the water is going to have a very different level of response than 5 people, a whole boat full of people in the water. You can't anticipate everything that might happen in a SOC. That's impossible. But having that mindset that you need to be ready for things to change is good. It's good to just be prepared mentally. And different factors are going to increase or decrease risk in both environments. So if it's really cold, having somebody swim is riskier. They're at higher risk for hypothermia. If you are, say, migrating everything from on-prem to the cloud in your environment, you might have to tweak your monitoring a little bit to sort of cover that area of risk until that project is completed. I know a lot of you are listening to this, and I'm sure I'm not telling some of you anything new. And you're thinking, there's not enough time. And I have a huge amount of empathy and sympathy for that. It's also unfortunately true that you have more time now than you will during an active event. It doesn't feel like you have downtime or the luxury of time, but comparatively, you do. So I would encourage teams to learn the environment with that relative downtime in mind. So, you're not going to learn rocks and river currents. What are the exceptions to policy in your environment? Those, oh, well, except for moments when you start talking about different policies that you have. How many service accounts do you have? How many domain admins do you have? What are your crown jewel locations? If I come to you and ask for a list of all that mission critical data and where it's located, would you be able to hand me a list of those locations? These are very good things to have before you have to have them. On the river, we use a lot of tools to help us keep everybody safe and do our jobs better. You have to practice with them. That's important. If you're throwing a rope bag and you're not good at throwing it, you haven't practiced, you're equally likely to miss your swimmer or hit them in the head. So you need to practice with your tools to make sure you know how to use them properly. You need to make sure they're in good condition. Boats with holes in them and broken paddles are not as effective as tools that are in proper condition. And it's good to have redundancies. If you use a rope bag, have an extra rope that you can throw to someone, have multiple first aid kits. I'm sure you can see the overlap here is very quick. We use so many tools. We've had so many good talks this week about how to kind of use those tools, maximize their effectiveness. And so I want to encourage you to think about it, not just in sort of a micro way, but also that macro perspective. Overall, can you find what you need in your logs? Can you push out changes quickly? Does your team know how to use your tools effectively? I had someone tell me a story once. Their team was in the middle of an active incident and they had PCAPs, which is great, but they rolled really fast. It was only about 5 hours. So the IR team lead told someone, hey, go pull these PCAPs. We really need them. Teammate said, great, yes, doing it on it. But they did not know how to use the tool. So they taught themselves how to use the tool. Unfortunately, by the time they figured out how to use the tool, the data had rolled. So they weren't able to acquire it And when I was kind of chit-chatting with this person, they told me that they felt like that was not just on the analyst, but also there hadn't been a conversation about what skill level people had in the different tools in the environment. And that's something to do, you know, just see what skill levels people have. Is there something you can practice in that relative downtime? You know, performance under load, if you've got a lot of people in your logging environment, how is it going to perform if you've got maybe 3 people running comprehensive searches at the same time? This is good to know. How long is it going to take to get back the data that you need when you're having to rush under the stress of an incident? Also, it's good to upgrade and improve your tools over time. This does not have to be expensive changes, because I know that's a touchy subject and can be very challenging. But you know, can you maybe have flow data available if you can't have PCAPs? That can be very useful for determining if there's been data theft. Can you enable enhanced PowerShell logging? Love enhanced PowerShell logging. FireEye has a great blog on enhanced PowerShell logging. I would highly recommend taking a look at it, especially in these days of Cobalt Strike that we're currently living in. Another point of similarity is that your team can change and expand based on how severe the incident is. So you have one swimmer in the river, it's going to be you, it's going to be the guides on your trip. This goes all the way up to, at the very top, you have the power company that controls the dam. So the river's dam fed, and the power company turns the water on in the morning and off in the evening for peak hours and peak power production. If there's a severe enough incident, like let's say there needs to be a recovery operation, every rafting company has the number. The manager can call up to the dam operators. They can turn off the river. This is a very big decision, turning off the river. It affects everybody downstream of that choice, both literally and figuratively. It's got to be a decision with a lot of people involved, but that conversation has happened ahead of time, and people are ready when that moment happens, if it needs to. For your team and your org, you know, it's really important to be able to trust your team, and kind of helping each other build skills, helping each other learn the roles that you have is one of the things that helps develop that trust. You know what other people expect of you, you know what you're expected to do. Defining those roles and knowing skill sets before emergencies is very helpful. It's important to know when to call in third parties to help out. So, you know, if there's an incident on the river, it's a medical emergency, we're going to call EMS. We're not going to try to handle that ourselves. It's good to know where those areas of specialty are, where you might need to call in someone to offer a little help. And also, who can turn off the river at your org? Of course, the metaphor is, you know, who can turn off the internet if you have to. Make sure that everybody who needs to have that conversation is prepared to potentially have that conversation. It's important to practice your emergency skills before you need them as well. So, you know, we've talked a lot about practicing day-to-day skills, practicing, you know, getting to use your tools, getting to be in the environment. But how can you practice your emergency skills? You know, this is important because you don't do it every day. So you need to keep that sharp, if at all possible. And there are some ways to do that. It's not just a hopeless case. So, you know, one of the things that you can do is, I mentioned just tabletop exercises here, but there are other exercises that you can do. Red team, purple team. You can go to cyber ranges. You can have these kind of formal training exercises, and they can provide a lot of value. If you have to do them for auditing, you know, treat them like an opportunity to get all of the essential people in the same room together. Also, informal practice scenarios are great. Maybe you sit down with your team every now and then, you pull out a prior incident, and you talk through it. You talk through decisions made, lessons learned, ways that you've improved since then. It can be very helpful, especially for newer analysts and people new to your org. Talk about incidents at other orgs with your team as well. You know, what did they learn? What can you learn? What things are you doing similarly versus differently? How can that help you prepare? And does your incident response plan meet the needs of your analysts? This is very important because I know you all have incident response plans. I'm sure you do. If you have to have them, you know, make them work for you. Maximize their efficacy. Make sure that you have plans to keep them up to date. because what that does is it lays a groundwork of actions and best practices so people know what to do in those really stressful moments, which is helpful. Cognitive load came up in the previous panel. This helps reduce some of that cognitive load in really stressful moments. So what are our key takeaways from this section on preparation? Preparation and prevention have to go hand in hand in today's threat landscape. Try to use the comparative downtime between incidents to prepare, if at all possible, to have some things ready for you and your team. Learn your environment before you have to know what's in it, if at all possible. Practice using skills and tools with the idea that you'll be able to use them better when you're under duress. Have these conversations about incident response as part of the job in the org. That way everybody's prepared. You don't have to come up with as many urgent, spur of the moment ideas for solutions when you've talked about them ahead of time. And make sure that you're, talking to your team, that you trust them, that you're able to work together, that you understand each other's roles and how to execute those roles under stress. It's a picture of me on my very first solo boat after I checked out with my very first swimmer at Nantahala Falls. He was fine. I was very surprised. He was very surprised, but I was prepared. He was fine. Let's talk about what happens when things happen. So something has gone not according to plan. This is a little cliche, but take a moment to breathe. I hear it a lot from my friends that work in other industries. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. If you take those moments, take a few beats, it's very natural to want to react immediately. But if you take a moment, you can help those actions be strategic and constructive, which can be very important. Another piece of this is making sure that you're communicating very quickly and effectively when it looks like something is starting to happen. You need to make sure that everybody who can help the outcome be as good as possible is looped in as quickly as possible. Try not to make assumptions or jump to conclusions. Just sort of work with what you're seeing. That will also help loop in the appropriate people at the right time. And start to get a feel for whether this is going to be a sprint or a marathon. You can use your resources differently if it's a sprint versus a marathon, especially when it comes to your team and their internal and cognitive resources. First thing you should do after kind of taking that moment, taking a breath, communicating, getting that process started, is you should also follow your org-specific best practices, whatever those are. This needs to be part of preparation. Ideally, it has been. So when this momentum starts to build with an incident or a potential incident, what are your playbooks for this scenario? What does your incident response plan say to do? Do you have process documentation for the steps you're going to need to contain a system or gather live response data? What are your decision trees for who to contact and when, and what are those essential communication pathways? Try to lay this beforehand, because like I said, these are decisions, these are choices that your team won't have to make in the moment. They've been made ahead of time. And it means you can jump to other things more quickly, which is very, very helpful. I've also gathered a list of kind of general all-purpose good first steps to help improve long-term incident outcomes. And the first one is take good notes. This does so many good things for you. This means you can share where you're at immediately. As soon as somebody walks to your desk, as soon as somebody pings you on Teams, you're able to share what you have in that moment. It's really good to not make assumptions about what you're going to remember while you're stressed. Things that you can remember really easily, IP addresses maybe in your environment, might fall right out of your brain under stress. And that's not your fault. It's just stress affects our brain in ways that make it more challenging to do things like hold on to that short-term memory. So take those good notes. Good notes also let you take a break, and then you can come back to that, or you can switch to a different task and come back to what you were doing. without it taking as long for you to come up to speed. You know, it's a kind thing to do for future you in these circumstances. So what are you taking these good notes on? Well, you're documenting things. You're documenting relevant investigation items. I have a list of a whole bunch here. There can be a lot more. Anything that you notice that could be relevant, go ahead and write that down and keep track of that. Do your best to maintain evidence integrity. This is challenging, and it can be very tempting to just nuke everything immediately. And sometimes you might have to, you know, it depends on the situation, which is part of having the right people in the room to have these conversations. But if you can maintain evidence integrity, that can help a lot, especially when it comes to determining the kind of initial attack path of some of these threat actors in your environment. You have all these good notes that I know you're taking. Compare them early and compare them often with your team members. This is good because it helps prevent duplicated efforts. It also helps prevent you from losing threads in a very stressful environment. It can be helpful to designate a single point of contact to communicate with the executive team. And I know for a lot of teams, this is part of the IR lead's duty. And that can be very challenging because it means they have to switch between being deep in the weeds to communicating with the executive team. If you can have somebody whose role is to do that, to act as that go-between full-time, then the executive team is getting the updates that they want and need. And your technical team can stay in the weeds. They can stay in investigative mode, which is very helpful. Task switching is very cognitively draining and challenging. Also, if it starts becoming clear that high impact actions might need to happen, go ahead and loop in those stakeholders sooner rather than later. If it's looking like you're going to need to turn the river off, go ahead and start pulling those people in at appropriate times, because then those conversations can start to happen and that decision can be made more quickly when that moment arrives, if it arrives. For those of you who work in, or maybe have worked previously in other environments, I'm sure you've heard the term scene safety, if you've done any kind of response work. You need to make sure that you are making it safe for your analysts to operate in the environment and to continue the investigation. So what are some things that you can do? You know, maybe you need to disable some accounts. Maybe you need to block some IPs so there can't be ongoing C2 activity. Maybe you need to make sure to contain some infected systems. Heard a story once that someone had a help desk employee that was trying to figure out the scope of the incident, so they kept logging in to different systems. And the threat actor was following them, was watching their account, was able to pivot immediately. So it just so happened that every system the help desk employee logged into happened to be infected because the threat actor was able to just kind of follow him along. So something like that, you know, make it safe for people to operate and move in the environment. And maybe you talked about being able to push out changes. Containing malicious actions or preventing malicious actions is helpful. So like I said, containing systems. One really good story, I was on a bridge and a very quick thinking member of the team pushed out a ban on writing anything to the temp directory, which stopped the encryptor from deploying across the environment. I do not recommend that as standard practice, but having the right people in the room and being able to do those things can be very, very helpful. Discuss risk of the dramatic measures that you might be taking as part of this. As responders and as people who are working in this industry, our actions should do less harm overall than the attacker's actions or potential actions. Talking to another friend, I was talking about, they had a retail store that they were going to turn the internet off to, and one of the executives piped up and said, "Can the pharmacy still fill prescriptions if the internet is turned off?" This is a good question. You know, maybe it's one of the things that makes it a good idea to have the right people in the room. We've talked a lot about cognitive loading, and if y'all know me, I'm very interested and invested in analyst stress and analyst burnout, as well as incident response. Stress and lack of sleep causes degraded cognitive performance. But the thing about it that makes it really challenging is that the person who is experiencing this degradation in performance is not aware of the change. They still think they're performing at the same level. And this starts to happen with as little as 2 nights, not enough sleep. And it takes more than 2 nights to recover those cognitive deficits. So think about your team as the resource that you need to make it happen. That's the case on the river. Your guides are the people on the river making these decisions. Your analysts are the folks in the SOC making these choices. If they burn out, you're going to have to wait for more people, if there are more people, to come and help out. I feel very strongly that it should never be okay for people to push themselves or to feel pushed to the point of failure. You know, if you had a very expensive, fine-tuned piece of machinery you were well invested in and your engineers said it's running too hot, you have to turn it off, you would, because otherwise you would not only be kind of pushing it to the max in that moment, but you also might not have it for later, you know, help and use. And I think that that's something that's very important to keep in mind. You know, we're not as we have qualities that the computers we're working on don't have, and that's okay. We're people. This is good. We just need to understand that and respect it and work with it as much as we can. Fresh minds mean also fresh ideas and solutions. Had a call a while back. Client team had been up for a few nights playing whack-a-mole with a threat actor in their environment. And we offered some suggestions and the team was amazing. They had done a wonderful job. Our suggestions were good, but not extraordinary suggestions, but they hadn't thought of them because they were so depleted from being up for so long. It's just such a stressful environment, even for people who do this every day, even for, you know, some of the folks that I work with and from what I've experienced. Intense incidents are stressful for everyone involved, even more so for people who don't do this all the time. So, you know, let's have empathy. Let's be kind to each other. It makes the process better. It makes our outcomes better in the long run. So what are our key takeaways from our action portion of this talk? Remember to breathe and remember to take care of yourself. Good communication is very essential. Part of that good communication is good documentation and getting the right people in the room with you. Make sure that your actions, if possible, are strategic and mindful and constructive. Do your best to lay the groundwork for your org ahead of time with good org practices and industry best practices so that your team has fewer critical decisions to make while they're under a great deal of stress. And remember that your team is the one doing the work. They're the ones who are going to resolve this. And treat them as the people that have the boots on ground that are resolving these issues. You know, they're a precious resource. Respect that. So as we come to the end of our journey together, as we approach the takeout from the river, what are our final takeaways? So here's what whitewater rafting has taught me, and hopefully now you, about incident response. You know, we're all between incidents. Prevention alone is not good enough. You have to prepare in today's threat landscape. This responsibility is org-wide. This is not on an individual or a single team. This needs to be something that is baked into everybody's day-to-day from the top down. You don't have to talk about it all the time, but it needs to be present. This training, this preparation can make the difference between a successful rapid response and a longer, more arduous, more costly at all levels response. And remember that your team they're the folks doing the work. They need to have the right tools. They need to know how to use them. And they need to be able to work together for the very best possible outcome. Thank you all for being here today. That's all of the content that I have for you in the official slides, but I am going to put together a blog post with some of these follow-up tips. I want to especially thank Dan Nutting for being a soundboard for a lot of these early ideas, and my Mandy and IR folks for giving me some of those good tips and tricks. Thank you to Sans for putting all this together. This is splendid, and all of you for being here today. I'm going to be in the Slack hallway for about a half hour after this, since I didn't leave much time for questions, so come find me there. And also feel free to find me on the internet.
Wow, that was something. That was amazing. To sum it up, that was clear, concise, the analogies, the graphics, the simplistic way you're going about things. And it just felt like you were having a conversation the entire time, which is odd for these one-way talks, but you pulled it off. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I would ask if there's questions, but like, as you'll see when you go to Slack, like it's just comment after comment after comment of loving it. And there might have been a mention in there that you need to do a TED talk.
Oh gosh, maybe not today. But I was really excited to come and do this. This is my very first talk on my own topic, y'all. So thank you for having me.
No,
This was a real pleasure.
absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.